Welcome to FILMFEST München 2021. My name is Gia Weigl and I'm a programmer with the festival. Today I will be speaking to Gia Coppola, the director of Mainstream. Hi Gia, thank you so much for taking the time to meet us virtually here on the screen. Let's talk about your new film Mainstream. You said you were very passionate about the subject, and I know that you've been working on that film for 7 years, pretty much. So can you tell us a little, like, what was it that you were so passionate about, and what took you 7 years to actually make it happen?
Yeah, well, I mean, independent films are hard, and so it's somewhat the norm to have to take that long to get something off the ground. And it was just, I had seen the movie Face in the Crowd, and I felt very inspired by that, and it felt very relevant, even though this is a 1950s film that kind of deals with the transition of radio into television, but it's sort of telling this bigger idea through a love story. And I felt that we were in a similar sort of position of kind of migrating into the internet world, but how can you tell it in a cinematic way? And to me, that was through an emotional sort of love triangle. And I kind of always loved those movies that, like Twilight or Broadcast News, that just kind of is that standard, pulls at your heartstrings. But it really stemmed from also my fascination of just like what are cultural values, and me as an artist trying to fit in, and how do you feeling very alone in a way, and kind of trying to find a connection in some sort. So it was something that I really had to get out of my system, and I had to go in order to get out.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was really interesting that you just said that in that other film, it was sort of like about that transitional phase from radio to TV. If we said like Mainstream was a little tiny bit about like television to internet, or sort of, because I felt like the film is so much about nostalgia as well. When we talk about the visual elements and your visual style, to me it felt very nostalgic. Maybe you can tell us a bit about like how you approached that as well.
I think it's just a part of me. I feel very old-fashioned in a lot of ways. I like old literature. I like old movies, and so I think maybe it's just part of my taste of that kind of exuding from the project. And I'd like to try to find a way to take kind of classical elements and put them in a modern context.
Yeah, I thought that was really beautiful in Mainstream. And then also when you think about the persona that Andrew Garfield plays, that's also a part of him as well, like the character himself, like when as well visually, but also like when he's the showmaster of the TV show, or like when he starts to become an influencer, or like a real one. I thought that was very beautiful. And maybe we can talk a little about the character development of Link in the film, and how you approached that sort of like character development.
Yeah, I always am sort of drawn to a maniacal character. I think they're fun to work with, and they're entertaining. I like that kind of performance. And I getting to know Andrew and kind of trying to woo him for the project, and we talked a lot about what this character was, what he represented, and just did a lot of workshops of what would be exciting for him as an actor too, and kind of getting to play in that space. But he's also so smart about kind of our culture, and has similar interests of what I do, what I have. And so it was a product of kind of both of our heads coming together and running with that. But I think we wanted to tell a character that gets swept away by how the internet can impact your ego, and how we're sort of confronted with this every day, every minute, because of our phones, and social media is attached to our phones, and it's designed for us to stay tethered. And so how do you stay healthy in today's world?
Yeah, absolutely. And then maybe another aspect that sort of like is connected to this is fame, or the entire motive of fame. Like, to you, how did fame sort of like change through the internet that we can also see through the character of Andrew Garfield, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, this is a very old situation. It's just when you get too much attention, what happens to you, and that's fame. And now we're in a situation, as I've said, where you kind of are approached with it more frequently, of getting kind of instant gratification all the time. And so I think I just have a fascination with how do you navigate life when those things are confronting you. But I also live above Hollywood Boulevard, and I have sort of this fascination of Hollywood and why we kind of idolize fame and what does it mean to be a celebrity. Why do we put so much on that? And it's just an interesting place down there. Like, there's a guy dressed up as the Joker walking down the street, and there's all these restaurants that are designed to look like a Star Wars cafe, and it's just a fascinating world to me, and it's hard to totally describe why, but it's a bit like Disneyland or a facade.
Absolutely. And like maybe we can talk a little about like your research process in those 7 years as well.
Yeah.
Like how did you research it, and like what did you focus on when you looked for characters, influencers, and sort of like different facets of your characters in mainstream?
Yeah, I mean, I did a lot of research about just like the sort of making of the social media and how it's designed. And then there's this documentarian I love called Adam Curtis, who did kind of the history of propaganda and sort of looking at the root of the issue of how we got here. And then, with trying to understand the sort of social influencer world and how that's sort of constantly evolving and rapidly so, it was just talking to a lot of the influencers and understanding, not to be one-sided and nothing's in life is neither good or bad. So how do they view themselves? What's their relationship to what they do? Because it feels very foreign to me. And I think that was part of my interest of like, I don't understand this. I need to.
And then through the process of the movie and the movie itself, did your own relationship to social media change at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think social media used to be such a sad thing for me. It kind of made me feel like compare and despair, and it, ignited insecurity all the time. But now I feel like I don't have it on my phone anymore, and I use it in a way that I feel less interested in it. So I think by kind of doing this kind of cleansed me in that way. But I feel like I like it in terms of the magazine. I pull a lot of like image references from that, and I feel inspired by it in that way. But yeah, I feel like I have a different relationship with it now.
I thought about it because I watched the film for the first time at Venice, where it
Oh,
world
cool.
premiered in August 2020. And like when we think about this last year that we all lived through, sort of like isolated at home, very much talking to people through the internet, through digital channels. Would you like, after this sort of like year we all lived through, would you still make the same movie, or would you now even have a different vision or a different starting point maybe?
Yeah, no, it was an interesting thing to go through, like making this movie and then this unworldly thing, an unprecedented thing happened that it just changed my view of the film, and I think our relationship with technology, I found very, again, just interesting of how we were interacting with it and finding the pros of it. And I think for me, I guess I would still make the same film because to me, it's so much about like, can we use it in a better way? And it felt exciting that, that was sort of starting to percolate, and it was shifting and changing so much of like how movies were being a part of the world now is evolving. And, there's good and there's bad. And I really wanted to make a film that, you could look back on in a couple of years and it still feels somewhat the same because it's about the emotions. It's not so much the, whatever platform we're on, all of that kind of shifts so rapidly. So it's more about how do we relate and human nature within this sort of stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, maybe one last question that sort of like brings in another layer or context, because obviously it's a very creative and fictional film, but it has a sort of like socio-political and political element to it. Like, would you say that we need to change the internet and our use of the internet as well, regulate it a little more? Like, what would you think, like, how should we continue our lives online?
Yeah. In going into this, it was like, what is the antidote? But I don't feel like I found the answer. I feel like, you know, it's about the little things in life. It's about actual human connection, which is what we've really recognized during this time. It's about nature. But yeah, I feel like there's yeah, I mean, I guess sorry, I guess the sort of key to how we interact with it, yes, I feel like it's a bit lawless and there needs to be some sort of regulation in terms of how many ads we're absorbing. Sometimes I get a little tripped out of like, is my consciousness my own because I'm sort of saying, oh, I want this thing, but no, actually that's really because I just got some like ad that was implemented into my feed and I'm like, oh, that's stemming from there. So and you know, there's a lot of dangerous stuff that can come out of the internet as well, and so I feel like in that way we do want some form of like regulation. It's a bit like the Wild West still.
It is. It's still, I guess we're still getting used to it. But thank you so much for sharing this film with us and talking to us virtually. Thank you so
Yeah,
much, Gia.
yeah. Thanks for having me.